The key turned in the lock with a sharp click, sealing me inside a house that wasn't mine. I froze, my heart pounding as the man I'd never met me boss's father stood in the doorway, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the air feel too thick to breathe. This was supposed to be a simple gig: water the plants, feed the cat, and enjoy a quiet week in a suburban Chicago mansion. But now, with the door bolted and his shadow looming, I knew this week would be anything but simple. My name's Ethan Caldwell, 32, a graphic designer scraping by in a city that chews up dreamers like me. I'd been working for Nathan Harper, a slick marketing exec with a penthouse office and a smile that could sell ice to a blizzard, when he offered me $500 to house-sit his family's sprawling estate while he was off on a business trip. I didn't hesitate. A week in luxury, no rent to worry about, and a chance to impress the boss. I was in. The Harper estate was a dream: 6 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that could host a wedding. I arrived that Monday morning, duffel bag in hand, marveling at the oak-paneled walls and the grand piano that probably cost more than my car. Nathan's instructions were straightforward: keep the place tidy, water the orchids, and make sure his tabby, Luna, didn't claw the furniture to shreds. He'd mentioned his father, Richard, might swing by to check on things, but I figured that was a distant possibility. Richard Harper, I'd heard, was a retired architect who designed half the skyline in Chicago. A busy man. No reason he'd show up. By day 3, I'd settled into a rhythm. I'd sketch logo designs in the sunroom, sip coffee from Nathan's fancy espresso machine, and toss a toy mouse for Luna. The house felt like a sanctuary, a break from my cramped apartment and the constant grind of freelance deadlines. But that evening, as I was microwaving leftovers, I heard the front door creak open. Footsteps echoed through the foyer, heavy, deliberate. I turned, expecting a neighbor or a delivery guy. Instead, there he was, Richard Harper, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You must be Ethan," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake. He just stood there, keys dangling in his hand, studying me like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided to solve. "Yeah, that's me," I stammered, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Nathan said you might stop by?" He nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. "Plans changed. I'm staying here for a while." My stomach twisted. Staying? Nathan hadn't mentioned that. "Oh. Cool. I can clear out if you need." "No." He cut me off, stepping closer. "You stay? Nathan trusts you. That's enough for me." Then he turned, walked to the front door, and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place felt like a gavel slamming down. I didn't know why it unnerved me so much, but something about the way he moved, deliberate, almost possessive, set my nerves on edge. Richard didn't say much that first night. He disappeared into one of the upstairs bedrooms, leaving me to wonder what I'd gotten myself into. I tried to shake it off, focusing on my sketches, but my mind kept drifting to him. There was something about Richard, his quiet intensity, the way his presence filled the house, that I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was just the awkwardness of sharing space with a stranger. But deep down, I felt a pull, a curiosity I couldn't explain. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He was in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, his forearms strong from years of drafting blueprints by hand. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Sleep okay?" he asked, pouring a second mug and sliding it toward me. "Yeah, thanks," I said, taking the coffee. Our fingers brushed, and I swear my heart skipped. I pulled back, embarrassed, but he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did. We fell into an uneasy routine. I'd tend to the house while Richard worked in his study, sketching designs or reading thick books on architecture. But every so often, I'd catch him watching Muhen. I was watering the plants or playing with Luna. His gaze wasn't threatening, but it was heavy, like he was trying to figure me out. I started to notice things about him, too. The way he'd hum old jazz tunes under his breath. The way his laugh lines deepened when Luna did something silly. He was 58. I learned. Widowed for a decade. And carried a kind of quiet grief that made the house feel both alive and haunted. By the fourth day, the tension between us was palpable. We'd talk over coffee. Small things at first Chicago's brutal winters. My art. His designs. But there was an undercurrent. Something unspoken. I'd always known I was attracted to men. But I kept it quiet. Buried under the hustle of survival. Richard, though, stirred something in me. He was older. Sure. But there was a strength to him. A depth that made my pulse race. That night, after dinner, we sat in the living room. A fire crackling in the hearth. He poured us each a glass of whiskey. And the conversation turned personal. He asked about my life. My dreams. I told him about growing up in a small Ohio town. About leaving because I never fit in. About the weight of keeping parts of myself hidden. He listened. Really listened. And when I finished, he leaned forward. His eyes soft but piercing. You don't have to hide here, Ethan, he said. Not with me. My breath caught. The room felt smaller. The air charged. I wanted to ask what he meant. But before I could, he stood and walked to the door, checking the lock like he did every night. Only this time, he turned back to me, his expression unreadable. Get some sleep, he said. We've got a big day tomorrow. I didn't know what he meant, but as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something bigger than either of us could control. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting the hardwood floors in gold. I woke with a start. Richard's words from last night echoing in my head. You don't have to hide here, Ethan. They felt like a promise. Or maybe a challenge. And I wasn't sure which scared me more. I found him in the backyard, kneeling by a flower bed, his hands buried in the soil. He was planting bulbs, his movements precise yet gentle, like he was coaxing life from the earth. Morning, he called without looking up. Grab a trowel. You're helping. I hesitated, then joined him, the cool dirt grounding me as we worked side by side. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and freshly turned soil. We didn't talk much at first, just dug and planted. But the silence felt comfortable, like we'd done this 100 times before. Every so often, our shoulders brushed, and I'd catch myself holding my breath, hyper-aware of his presence. You're good at this, he said after a while, nodding at the neat row of bulbs I'd planted. Got a steady hand. Like an artist. I laughed, brushing dirt off my jeans. I'm just copying you. You're the one who looks like he's done this his whole life. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. My wife, Clara, loved gardening. This was her spot. His voice softened, and I saw that familiar shadow of grief pass over his face. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Felt like betraying her somehow. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, surprising myself, I asked, what changed? He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. You being here reminds me life doesn't stop. My chest tightened. There it was again, that pull. That unspoken thing between us. I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper. But before I could, He stood, brushing his hands off. "Come on," he said. "Let's clean up and get lunch." We spent the afternoon in the kitchen, making sandwiches and trading stories. He told me about designing his first building, a community center in Evanston, and how it felt to see people gather in a space he'd created. I told him about my art, how I'd always wanted to design something that mattered, not just logos for tech startups. The conversation flowed easily, but every so often, I'd catch him looking at me, his gaze lingering a beat too long. That evening, he suggested we watch a movie. We settled on the couch with Luna curled between us, the TV flickering with some old noir film he loved. The room was dark except for the screen's glow, and I could feel the heat of his arm next to mine. Halfway through, he shifted, his knee brushing against my thigh. I froze, my heart racing, but I didn't move away. Neither did he. "Ethan," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned, and his face was closer than I expected. His eyes locked on mine. "You ever feel like you're running from something, but you don't know what?" I swallowed hard. "All the time." He didn't say anything else, just leaned back. But the air between us crackled with tension. When the movie ended, he stood abruptly, muttering something about checking the locks. I watched him go, my mind spinning. What was this? Was I imagining it? Or was there something real, here something neither of us was ready to name? The next day, things felt different. He was quieter, more distant, like he was wrestling with something. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my thoughts kept drifting to him. That afternoon, I found an old photo album in the study while dusting the shelves. Inside were pictures of Richard and Clara laughing at a beach, dancing at their wedding. There was love in those photos, raw and undeniable. But there were also pictures of Richard alone. Later years, his smile faded, his eyes carrying a weight I recognized. Loneliness. I was still flipping through the album when he walked in. He stopped, his expression unreadable. "You found Claire's album," he said, his voice tight. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry," I said quickly, closing it. He shook his head, sitting beside me. "It's okay. She'd have liked you. You've got her kind of fire quiet, but strong." I didn't know how to respond, so I just sat there, the album between us. Then, softly, he started talking about Clara, about losing her to cancer, about the years of building walls around his heart. I listened, my throat tight, feeling the weight of his pain. When he finished, he looked at me, and I saw something new in his eyes: vulnerability, raw and unguarded. "I've been alone a long time, Ethan," he said. "Didn't think I'd ever want to feel again. But you." He trailed off, and my heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance. But fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if this was just my imagination, projecting onto a man who was just being kind? Before I could decide, he stood, his jaw tight. "I need some air," he said, and walked out, leaving me with the album and 1,000 unspoken questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, the way his eyes had held mine. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. I'd spent years hiding who I was, afraid of rejection, afraid of losing what little I had. But Richard made me want to be brave, to take a chance on something real. As I lay there, I heard footsteps downstairs, then the familiar click of the deadbolt. He was checking the locks again. But this time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt like maybe, just maybe, that locked door was keeping something precious inside. The house felt different after that night, like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke to the smell of bacon sizzling, and for a moment, I could pretend everything was normal. But the memory of Richard's unfinished sentence "but you" hung over me like a storm cloud, heavy with promise and uncertainty. I found him in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a focus that seemed forced. "Morning," I said, my voice cautious. He glanced up, his smile brief but warm, and handed me a plate. We ate in silence, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. I wanted to ask about last night, to push past the wall he'd put up, but something in his posture rigid, guarded told me to wait. After breakfast, he suggested we take Luna for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved from porches. We walked side by side, Luna trotting ahead, her bell jingling. The autumn air was crisp, and I shoved my hands in my pockets to keep from fidgeting. "You ever think about leaving Chicago?" Richard asked suddenly, his eyes on the horizon. I shrugged. "Sometimes. But it's home. You know, even if it's hard." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. I left for a while after Clara. Thought a change of scenery would fix things. It didn't. I glanced at him, catching the way his jaw tightened. "What brought you back?" He stopped walking, turning to face me. This house, her memory, and maybe, he hesitated, his eyes searching mine. Maybe the chance to start over. My heart raced, but before I could respond, Luna tugged at her leash, chasing a squirrel. We laughed, the tension breaking, but his words stayed with me. Start over. Was he talking about us? Or was I reading too much into it? Back at the house, we fell into our routine, but the undercurrent between us grew stronger. I'd catch him watching me as I sketched, his gaze soft but intense. Once, when I dropped a pencil, he bent to pick it up, our hands brushing again. This time, he didn't pull away. His fingers lingered, warm against mine, and I felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. That evening, he suggested we cook dinner together. We chopped vegetables and stirred sauce, moving around each other in the kitchen like we'd done it forever. He teased me about my knife skills, and I shot back about his obsession with perfect measurements. It felt easy, natural, but every two-cha hand on my shoulder, a nudge to pass the salt sent my pulse racing. After dinner, we sat on the back porch, the night cool and quiet. The stars were out, sharp against the dark sky, and I felt bold enough to ask, "What did you mean last night, when you said I made you want to feel again?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at the sky. Then he turned to me, his eyes raw with emotion. "I've been numb for years. Ethan, Clara was my world. And when she died, I thought that part of me died too. But being around you, it's like waking up." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I feel it too," I admitted. "But I'm scared. I've always kept this part of me quiet." He reached for my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You don't have to be quiet anymore." The world seemed to stop. His hand in mine felt like an anchor, grounding me in a way I hadn't known I needed. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He pulled back, muttering an apology, and answered it. It was Nathan, checking in. Richard's voice was steady, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided my eyes. When he hung up, he didn't come back to the porch. Instead, he went inside, locking the door behind him. I sat there, alone, staring at the stars, my heart a tangle of hope and fear. I wanted him more than I'd ever wanted anyone, but the weight of his past, of my own insecurities, felt like a wall we couldn't climb. The next day, Richard was distant again, burying himself in his work. I tried to focus on my sketches, but my mind was elsewhere. That afternoon, I found a letter tucked inside the photo album, addressed to Richard in Clara's handwriting. I didn't read, I couldn't, but its presence felt like a reminder of the life he'd lost. Was I fooling myself, thinking I could compete with a ghost? That night, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I found him in the study, surrounded by blueprints. "Richard," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to talk." He looked up, his expression guarded. "About what?" "About us. About whatever this is." I took a step closer, my hands clenched. "I'm not imagining it. Am I? There's something here." He stood, crossing the room in 2 strides. "You're not imagining it," he said, his voice low. "But it's not simple. Ethan, I'm older. I've got baggage. And Nathan doesn't get to decide this," I said, surprising myself with my own conviction. "This is about us." For a moment, he just looked at me, his eyes searching. Then he reached out, cupping my face in his hands, and kissed me. It was slow, tentative at first, then deeper, like he was pouring years of longing into it. I kissed him back, my hands gripping his shirt, feeling like I'd finally found something real. When we pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, "but I want to try." I smiled, my heart soaring. "Me too." But as we stood there, wrapped in each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that the locked door wasn't just keeping us in, it was keeping the world out. And sooner or later, the world would come knocking. The kiss changed everything. It was like a dam breaking, flooding the house with a warmth I hadn't known I was missing. Richard and I didn't talk about it the next morning, but we didn't need to. His hand lingered on mine as we made coffee, and his smile, rare and unguarded, felt like a gift. We spent the day together. No pretense of work. We walked through the neighborhood, Luna trailing behind, and talked about everything and nothing, our favorite books, the worst jobs we'd ever had, the dreams we'd buried under years of practicality. He told me about his first love, a boy in college he'd never had the courage to pursue. I told him about the years I'd spent dodging questions about my dating life, afraid of what people might think. With every word, the walls between us crumbled a little more. That afternoon, we ended up in the backyard again, lying on a blanket under the oak tree. The leaves were turning, a riot of red and gold, and I felt like I was in a painting, the world soft and vibrant around us. Richard propped himself on one elbow, looking down at me. "You make me feel young again," he said, his voice quiet but steady. I reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "You make me feel brave." He kissed me again, slow and deliberate, and I melted into it, the world fading away. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. I was just Ethan, falling for a man who saw me while I saw me. But the real world doesn't stay quiet for long. That evening, as we were washing dishes, the doorbell rang. Richard froze, his hands dripping with soap. "Stay here," he said, his voice sharp. I frowned, drying my hands. "Who is it?" He didn't answer, just strode to the door. I followed, ignoring his instruction, and saw him open it to reveal a woman in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and impeccably dressed. She looked past Richard, her gaze landing on me. "Dad," she said, her tone clipped. "Who's this?" "Dad." My stomach dropped. This was Nathan's sister, Emily, Richard's daughter. I'd seen her picture in the album, but the warmth in those photos was gone now. Her eyes were cold, assessing. "Ethan's house sitting for Nathan," Richard said, his voice calm but firm. "What are you doing here, Em?" She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Nathan called. Said you were acting strange. I came to check on you. I'm fine, Richard said, but I could hear the edge in his voice. You didn't need to come. Emily's eyes flicked to me again, lingering on the dish towel in my hands. Clearly, she said, her tone dripping with suspicion. The air grew thick with tension. I wanted to disappear, but Richard's hand brushed mine. A subtle reassurance. Ethan's been a big help, he said. Why don't you join us for dinner? Emily hesitated, then nodded, her expression unreadable. Dinner was awkward. The conversation stilted. She asked about my job, my background, but her questions felt like an interrogation. Richard tried to steer the conversation to neutral ground, but Emily's presence was like a storm cloud, casting shadows over everything. After she left, Richard locked the door behind her, his shoulders tense. I'm sorry, he said, turning to me. She's protective. Always has been. It's okay. I lied, but my stomach was in knots. Emily's visit was a reminder that whatever this was didn't exist in a vacuum. Richard had a family, a past, a life I was only beginning to understand. That night, we sat by the fire again, but the easy intimacy was gone. Richard stared into the flames, his jaw tight. Emily's always been the one to keep things together, he said finally. After Clara, she took it hard. She doesn't trust easily. I nodded, my throat tight. Does she know about you? He shook his head. I never told her. Never told anyone. It was easier to bury it. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. You don't have to bury it anymore. He looked at me, his eyes soft but pained. It's not that simple. Ethan, I've got kids. A legacy. I can't just. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I understood. Coming out at 58, with a family and a reputation, wasn't the same as coming out at 32. The weight of it pressed down on us, heavy and unyielding. The next day, I tried to focus on my tasks, but Emily's visit lingered like a bruise. Richard was quieter, his smiles rarer. I wanted to fix it, to bring back the warmth, but I didn't know how. That afternoon, I found him in the study, staring at a photo of Clara. I hesitated, then sat beside him. She'd want you to be happy, I said softly. You know that, right? He looked at me, his eyes glistening. I know, but it's hard to let go. I took his hand, my heart aching. You don't have to let go. You just have to make room. He squeezed my hand, and for a moment, I thought we'd be okay. But then his phone buzzed again, Nathan. This time, saying he'd be back early. Tomorrow. The week was almost up, and with it, our bubble was about to burst. That night, we lay in bed together, not speaking, just holding each other. I could feel the clock ticking, each second pulling us closer to a reality we weren't ready to face. But as I drifted to sleep, his arms around me, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to let him go. Nathan's return loomed like a guillotine. I woke to the sound of Richard moving downstairs. The familiar click of the deadbolt, a reminder of the walls we'd built around this fragile thing between us. Today was our last day alone, and the weight of it hung heavy in the air. We tried to make the most of it. We cooked breakfast together, laughing as we burned the toast. But there was an edge to our joy, a desperation to hold on to something slipping away. After breakfast, Richard suggested we drive to Lake Michigan. One last adventure, he said, his smile tinged with sadness. The lake was stunning, its waves crashing against the shore under a gray autumn sky. We walked along the beach, our hands brushing but not quite holding, aware of the people around us. Richard talked about his childhood, how he'd come here with his parents, dreaming of building skyscrapers. I told him about my own dreams, the ones I'd pushed aside for practicality. With every word, I felt closer to him, but also more aware of the gap between our worlds. Back at the house, we sat in the living room. Luna curled between us. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls, and I felt a surge of courage. "Richard," I said, turning to him, "what happens when Nathan gets back?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Ethan. I want thesis, but it's complicated. Nathan's my son. He's not. He doesn't know." I nodded, my throat tight. "Will you tell him?" He looked at me, his eyes searching. "I want to, but I need time." Time. The one thing we didn't have. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. "I'll wait," I said, even though the words felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. That evening, we cooked dinner again, moving around each other with a quiet intimacy. But as we sat down to eat, the doorbell rang. My heart sank. Nathan wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. But there he was, standing in the foyer, his suitcase at his feet. "Dad," he said, hugging Richard. Then his eyes landed on me, and his smile faltered. "Ethan, you're still here?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just wrapping up." Nathan's gaze flicked between us, and I saw a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his tone casual but sharp. "Fine," Richard said quickly. "Ethan's been great. House is in one piece." Nathan nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Dinner was tense, with Nathan asking pointed questions about my work, my plans, my life. Richard tried to keep things light, but the air was thick with unspoken questions. When Nathan finally went to bed, Richard walked me to the guest room. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his hand on my arm. "This isn't how I wanted it to end." "It's not over," I said, my voice fierce. "Not unless you want it to be." He looked at me, his eyes full of conflict. "I don't," he said, "but I need to figure this out." I nodded, my heart aching. "I'll be here." But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet of the house, I wasn't so sure. Nathan's presence changed everything. A reminder of the life Richard had built, one that didn't include me. I thought about leaving, slipping out before things got messy. But the thought of walking away from Richard was unbearable. The next morning, Nathan was up early, already on his laptop, barking orders into his phone. Richard was quieter, his eyes avoiding mine. I busied myself with packing, trying to ignore the growing dread in my chest. When Nathan stepped out for a meeting, Richard found me in the kitchen. "Ethan," he said, his voice low. "I meant what I said. I want this. But I need to talk to Nathan. Alone." I nodded, my throat tight. "I get it. Just don't take too long. Okay." He smiled, a sad, hopeful thing, and pulled me into a hug. It was brief, but it felt like a lifeline. When he let go, I grabbed Steno bag and headed for the door, glancing back one last time. He was standing by the fireplace, watching me go, and I knew that whatever happened next would change us both. Back at my apartment, the world felt too small, too ordinary. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting to Richard, the way he'd looked at me, the way his hand had felt in mine. I wanted to believe he'd tell Nathan, that he'd choose us, but doubt gnawed at me. What if he couldn't? What if the weight of his past was too heavy? That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Can we talk?" "Tomorrow, 7 p.m. My place." My heart leapt. But fear followed close behind. Tomorrow would be the moment of truth for him. For me. For us. The next day dragged on. Each hour a battle against my own nerves. I kept replaying Richard's text, trying to decipher his tone. Was it hope? Fear? I didn't know. But by the time I pulled up to the Harper estate at 7 p.m., my hands were shaking. Richard answered the door, his face a mix of relief and tension. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The house felt different with Nathan backless, like our sanctuary. More like a stage where every move was watched. Nathan was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, but he looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," he said, setting his phone down. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." I forced a smile. "Richard asked me to come by." Nathan's eyes flicked to his father, and I saw the question there, the same one Emily had asked. Richard cleared his throat. "Nathan, we need to talk. All of us." My stomach twisted. This was it. Richard gestured for us to sit, and I perched on the edge of the couch, my heart pounding. Nathan leaned back, arms crossed, his posture defensive. "Ethan's been more than a house sitter," Richard began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "He's important to me." Nathan's brow furrowed. "Important how?" Richard took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine for a moment before turning back to his son. "I'm in love with him." The words hit like a thunderclap. I stared at Richard, my heart soaring even as fear clawed at me. Nathan's face went blank, then hardened. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "I'm gay," Richard said, his voice unwavering. "I've known it for years, but I buried it. For Clara. For you. For Emily. But I can't anymore. Ethan's changed that." Nathan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a joke, right? You're 58. You were married to Mom for 25 years. I loved your mother," Richard said, his voice breaking. "That was real. But this is real too." Nathan turned to me, his eyes blazing. "And you? What's your angle? Trying to get a promotion? Or just messing with my family?" I flinched but held his gaze. "I love him," I said simply. "That's it." Nathan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "This is insane. You're telling me you're throwing away everything Mom's memory, our family, for some guy you met a week ago?" "It's not about throwing anything away," Richard said, standing now. "It's about being honest. For the first time in years, I feel alive." Nathan shook his head, pacing. "I can't deal with this. Not now." He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard sank onto the couch, his face in his hands. I knelt beside him, touching his shoulder. "You okay?" He looked up, his eyes wet. "I don't know, but I had to do it." I nodded, my throat tight. "You were brave." He gave a small, sad smile. "So were you." We sat there for a long time, not speaking, just holding each other. I wanted to believe this was a victory, but Nathan's reaction hung over us like a storm cloud. I knew this wasn't the end. Families don't unravel that easily, and they don't heal that quickly either. The next day, Richard got a call from Emily. Nathan had told her everything, and she was on her way over. I braced myself, expecting another confrontation. But when she arrived, her demeanor was different, softer, almost hesitant. "Dad," she said, sitting across from us. "Nathan's upset, but he'll come around. He just needs time." Richard nodded, his jaw tight. "And you? What do you think?" Emily sighed, her eyes flicking to me. I don't understand it. But I saw how you looked at him last time I was here. You haven't looked that alive since Mom. I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't approval. Not exactly. But it was something. A crack in the wall. I just want you to be happy, she said finally. But you need to talk to Nathan. Really talk. Richard nodded, squeezing my hand. I will. After Emily left, we spent the day together, trying to reclaim the ease we'd had before. We cooked, laughed, kissed, but the weight of Nathan's reaction lingered. That evening, Richard got a text from him, I need space. I'll call you. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As night fell, we lay in bed, the house quiet around us. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard pulled me close, his breath warm against my neck. We figure it out. Together. I smiled, my heart full despite the uncertainty. For the first time, I felt like we had a chance not just to be together, but to build something real, something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a delicate dance between hope and uncertainty. Richard and I settled into a new rhythm, spending evenings together at the house. But Nathan's absence cast a long shadow. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, and every day without word from him felt like a weight on Richard's shoulders. I tried to keep things light, bringing over my sketchpad to work on designs while Richard pored over his blueprints. We'd sit in the study, Luna curled up nearby, and talk about the future small things, like weekend trips or trying new restaurants. But the bigger question's what this meant for his family, for my career, for us shivered unspoken. One afternoon, while we were planting more bulbs in the backyard, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face tightening. It's Nathan, he said, stepping away to answer. I watched him pace, his voice low but strained. When he hung up, he looked drained. He wants to meet. Tomorrow. Just the two of us. I nodded, my stomach twisting. That's good. Right. He's reaching out. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. I hope so. But he sounded cold. I reached for his hand, squeezing it. He's your son. He loves you. Just give him time. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're too good for me, Ethan. I laughed, nudging him. You're not so bad yourself. That night, we made love for the first time, slow and deliberate, like we were mapping each other's souls. It wasn't just physical, it was a promise, a commitment to face whatever came next together. As I lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The next morning, Richard left to meet Nathan at a coffee shop downtown. I stayed behind, trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to them. What if Nathan couldn't accept this? What if he forced Richard to choose? I shook off the thought, busying myself with chores, but the house felt emptier without Richard. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He sank onto the couch, staring at the floor. He's angry, he said finally. Not just about yous, about me keeping this from him. He feels like he doesn't know me. I sat beside him, my heart aching. What did you say? I told him the truth. He said, that I loved Clara, that I love him and Emily, but that I've been hiding this part of myself my whole life. I told him about you, about how you make me feel alive. I swallowed hard. And he listened. Richard said, didn't say much, just listened. Then he left. I took his hand, my throat tight. He'll come around. He just needs to process. Richard nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We spent the rest of the day quietly, the weight of Nathan's reaction pressing down on us. That evening, Emily called, offering to talk to Nathan, to help him understand. It was a small comfort, but it was something. The next day, I went back to my apartment, giving Richard space to navigate his family. The distance felt wrong, like I'd left a piece of myself behind. But I knew he needed this. I threw myself into work, sketching designs with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. Richard's courage, his willingness to risk everything for years inspired me to take risks of my own, to chase the art I'd always wanted to create. A week later, Richard called me back to the house. When I arrived, Nathan was there, sitting in the living room. My heart sank, but Richard's smile was steady. "He wants to talk," he said, gesturing for me to sit. Nathan looked at me, his expression softer than before. "I'm not okay with this," he said bluntly. "Not yet. But I'm trying. For Dad." I nodded, my throat tight. "That's all I can ask." We talked for hours about Richard's past, about my life, about what this meant for all of us. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Nathan's anger flared. But he stayed. He listened. And when he left, he hugged his father, a small gesture that felt like a bridge. That night, Richard and I sat on the porch, the stars bright above us. "I don't know what's next," he said, his hand in mine, "but I know I want you in it." I smiled, my heart full. "I'm not going anywhere." Months passed, and the Harper estate became a second home. Richard and I grew closer, building a life together one day at a time. Nathan came around slowly, his visits tentative but growing warmer. Emily, too, became an ally, inviting us to family dinners and teasing Richard about his newfound love for my terrible cooking. We faced challenges, whispers from colleagues, curious looks from neighbors, but we faced them together. I started submitting my art to galleries, inspired by Richard's belief in me, and he began designing again. His passion reignited. The house, once a shrine to Clara's memory, became a place of new beginnings, filled with laughter and love. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Richard handed me a small box. Inside was a key not to the house, but to a future we'd build together. "Move in," he said, his eyes shining. "Let's make this real." I said yes, my heart soaring. The door was still locked every night. But now it wasn't about keeping the world out, it was about keeping our world safe. As we stood in the backyard, planting bulbs in Clara's garden, I realized that love isn't about erasing the past. It's about making room for the future, about finding courage to be who you are, no matter the cost. Richard and I had found that courage, and in doing so, we'd found each other. The locked door had been the beginning, but it was our love that opened the world.